Five of the Best is an opinion-based series on films which I have seen released during the chosen year. This is to celebrate previous years in film, not to cause any offence. All opinions are my own.
Hi everyone, welcome back to 5 of the Best, the series in which we celebrate movie years and all the films that have been released that I've seen that I really enjoyed during that year. For this video we're talking about the year 2024, and for this series it's been a bit of a catch-up over the last 2 years or so of me uploading up to the current day. And now we are at the current day. 2024 has just finished, and so this is going to be my roundup, summary, and my favourite films of the year 2024. Before we start talking about the Honourable Mentions, a little bit of admin. I have decided to change the format of the Honourable Mentions. I just think it makes a little bit more sense. They will go in order of rating. So the lowest score that can make it to Honourable Mentions is 7.5, and anything up from that makes it onto the list. So it'll go 7.5, then the 8s, then the 8.5s, and if applicable, the 9s, and even the 9.5s. If a movie year is that strong to have a 9.5 in Honourable Mentions, my god, I'd like to see that year. But let's get started with the Honourable Mentions. So the first Honourable Mention on the 7.5 is Monkey Man. Dev Patel basically became John Wick, but in its own kind of spin on the genre, in a very effective way, and in a way that, yes, echoes the John Wick and has the brilliant action of that film, but again has its own story to tell. And then after that we had Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire, a film that I actually enjoyed more than I thought I would. Yes, these films aren't absolutely amazing, and that's for sure, but in a kind of switch your brain off way, I enjoyed this more than I thought I would. After this we had Back to Black, yet another music biopic, but in this case yet another effective one. A really star-making performance from Marisa Bella in the lead role as Amy Winehouse. Back to Black is a surprisingly effective and emotional music biopic that kind of went under the radar a little bit. Then after that we had another experience from the wacky mind of Yorgos Lanthimos in Kinds of Kindness. Some brilliant performances from some of his regulars, particularly Emma Stone, Jesse Plemons, Willem Dafoe. A lot of great actors here, and 3 stories that aren't really connected whatsoever, but all kind of have the same through-line tone that are surprisingly effective, and it certainly is one of the more unique experiences of this year. And then after that, we had Speak No Evil, James McAvoy in a lead role in a kind of darkly sinister film that you kind of always knew it was going to turn sinister, but it's just how it does. And when it does, it is surprisingly effective. And him in the lead role is a really brilliant performance. It's one of the more standout performances of 2024. James McAvoy does what he does in so many of his outings, brings a lot to the lead role, and also the supporting cast is pretty damn good too, along with a good premise. Speak No Evil is a sinister time that you just don't know when it's going to turn full sinister. And speaking of sinister times, that leads us very well on to Smile 2. The first Smile is a film that I thought was kind of broke the mold, and when it was first announced as a horror film, I thought this just sounds very generic. But Smile 2 does what the first film did well in subverting expectations, even more so. The second film is definitely a step up in the first. It's got better scares, it's got a better lead performance from Naomi Scott, and is one of the better horror films of this year. And from one strong female lead to a dual strong female lead in Love Lies Bleeding. 2 brilliant performances by Kristen Stewart and Katie O'Brien in the 2 lead roles, and the scenario that is probably one of the more unique of this year. And yes, it harkens to maybe something a little bit akin to something like Thelma and Louise, but it certainly has its own spin, it has its own story to tell, and Love Lies Bleeding was definitely one of the bigger surprises of the year. And from one film led by 2 really brilliant female lead performances to another in Wicked. Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande with the 2 best musical performances of this year, and the musical of the year, essentially, in Wicked, with exactly what you thought it would be, but also so much more. A brilliant adaptation of the stage play, and a brilliant part 1. Part 2, I would imagine, is either going to strengthen or hamper this first film. And not long after Wicked, we had Lord of the Rings: War of the Rohirrim. And as I said when I talked about it, adding Lord of the Rings or Tolkien in any way to something is a bit of a cheat code for me. I love everything Lord of the Rings. And while the animation here isn't or is probably the worst thing about this. Everything else is really strong. A good story, a good addition to the Tolkien lore, a good strengthening of background characters and history of locations. And overall, War of the Rohirrim is certainly, for a Tolkien fan, a great addition to the lore. And for the final 7.5 out of 10, we had a film I was surprised by. Sonic the Hedgehog 3. The first Sonic is an enjoyable time. The second Sonic built on the first, and the third Sonic is even better again. And it makes it one of the more fun family films released this year. And honestly, I wish they had made video game movies like this when I was growing up. So moving on to the 8 out of 10s, the first film of this is Immaculate, starring Sydney Sweeney, in a film that I thought looked very generic and didn't. It looked actually like it could have been a potentially worst film of the year. But honestly, Immaculate surprised me a lot. A great lead performance by Sydney Sweeney, probably her best on the big screen so far. And an effective horror film too. An interesting premise and a film that did surprise me in many, many ways. And from one film that was a surprise to another, in Wicked Little Letters. Not that I was surprised that Olivia Colman was brilliant, because she is in nearly everything I've seen her in, but particularly in this film, Jessie Buckley, who I was not familiar with, but does a great turn, and is such a fun and light-hearted little film that it's hard not to feel the charm of. After this, we had one of our biggest releases of the year in Challengers, a tennis film for someone who, personally, I don't care anything about tennis. I do now. Challengers is a really effective film in getting you hooked into the story, the dynamic, and the kind of disputes that the characters have between each other. Two great performances in particular by Mike Feist and Josh O'Connor, but Zendaya is the star. Zendaya is the star. It's not the last time I'll be talking about her in this video alone. Zendaya is fantastic in Challengers. And Challengers is a lot more effective than you would think it is just by watching the trailer. And from one film that was surprisingly effective to another in Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. I would have been happy if they ended with the Matt Reeves trilogy, The War of the Planet of the Apes, closing this off. But now I've seen Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, I was glad they continued. There's a lot of care, a lot of love, and honestly this is one of my biggest surprises of the year, how much I enjoyed this film. But from a surprising quality to an expectation. After seeing how brilliant Mad Max Fury Road was, I expected a lot from Furiosa, and I got a lot in Furiosa. Furiosa, particularly Anya Taylor-Joy's performance, and also Chris Hemsworth, one of his best performances I can remember. Furiosa has a lot of what you loved in Mad Max Fury Road, and while it isn't as effective as that film, it's a brilliant continuation of the lore, the setting, and the story being told. And from one continuation of a story to a really rewarding one, in Inside Out 2, probably the family film of the year. A film that I thought the first film was like, they've captured lightning in a bottle and they didn't need to make a sequel. No, I'm glad they did. They explored it more with additional things like anxiety and envy, and I just think it was such a genius move to continue this in the way they did. Inside Out 2 is definitely the family film of the year. And from a family film to a not so family friendly film, in Deadpool and Wolverine, the only MCU outing this year, and having one MCU film was such a blessing. Add to that, you've got two really enjoyable performances here by Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman doing what they do best in these characters that they're probably best known by at this point. And also, it's probably the funniest film of this year. Hilarious moments, such tongue-in-cheek that you would expect, but also a lot more heartwarming moments than you would expect. While it maybe isn't the best Deadpool film of all, or a Wolverine film for that matter, it definitely is one of the more fun films of this year, story aside. And after this, we had Lee, a brilliant performance by Kate Winslet, who may get a nomination at the Academy Awards for this, the wartime photographer performance, and also surprisingly a brilliantly emotional performance by Andy Samberg of all people. Lee is a film that seemed to have gone a bit under the radar, but don't let it. If you think this is a film that you really enjoy, Lee is definitely worth your time. And after this, we had what some people are calling this generation's train spawning in Kneecap, a film from home soil. It's a film that does not take itself in any way too seriously, is an enjoyable kind of mockumentary, documentary story, fabrication, but also true, about the real life band Kneecap. If you think this is a film that you would enjoy, definitely make time to see this one. Kneecap is a film that has a lot of humour that I found very effective for obvious reasons, but also is a film that surprisingly has a lot more to it than you would think. And for the last of the 8 out of 10s, we had Heretic. Hugh Grant showing that he has completely changed his acting prowess from the 90s and when he was just the rom-com guy, and now is an actor that has such depth and is one of the best in the business nowadays in the sense of smiling and having a sadistic undertone throughout. Heretic is one of the best examples of this. It also has questions that make you think about it after you leave the cinema. Heretic, surprisingly, is an enjoyable one. And now to the 8.5s, and firstly, Alien Romulus. The Alien series is brilliant in the early outings. Alien and Aliens. After that, quality varies, let's say. But honestly, Alien Romulus, while it isn't at the quality of those first two films I've mentioned, it's probably the closest we've got since, because Alien Romulus has it's innovative in its way of it's taking it in a new direction, but also does a brilliant way of playing the nostalgia card and playing great homage to what came before in a way that resonates both with fans and also takes it in a new direction to see what comes next. Alien Romulus was a brilliant surprise in how much it was able to recapture the magic of what made Alien so special, and not maybe to the extent of the first Alien film, but it definitely had a lot of moments that I was so glad we've had an Alien film that is good, because I was kind of losing faith in these films, and it surprised me, it got me back in, and now the next Alien film I'm excited for, and I hope it can even have half the quality that Alien Romulus has. And for our final honourable mention, Anora. A truly, truly, truly brilliant performance by Mikey Madison, who, for me, is a frontrunner for an Academy Award this upcoming season, because she is fantastic. Anora is a surprise in almost every way. The premise, the kind of Pretty Woman premise to an extent, that is almost flipped on its head halfway through. The twists and turns the story takes. It is one of the most hilarious films of the year. It is one of the most emotional films of the year. And honestly, Anora, it isn't often you see a film that subverts your expectations almost every way. But Anora definitely did that, and it is, without doubt, the closest of breaking into the top 5 of this year. Anora is brilliant. A strong list of 8 honourable mentions, and Anora sits atop that. And yes, before we finish with the honourable mentions, I will acknowledge that a lot of those I class as surprises, but that was because in 2024, most of the films that I had hoped or had the expectation for, not all of them, but a good lot, I was let down to a certain extent. Most of the films I've loved, and a lot of those ones that we've talked about already in the honourable mentions, and some that will appear in the top 5, were ones that genuinely came out of nowhere, or were films I didn't have big hope for, and really shocked me at how good they were. So with that being said, let's get into the top 5.
Now, let's get on to the list and start with number 5.
A Quiet Place Day 1 is directed by Michael Sarnowski and stars Lupita Nyong'o and Joseph Quinn. So to start talking about the year of 2024, and in number 5 we have the third installment in the Quiet Place franchise. And I'll be honest, I'll be totally truthful, while it was a film that I was anticipating a lot, and I was hoping that would have been good and take the franchise in a new direction, it was more hope than expectation for this. Because of course, the brilliance of A Quiet Place and A Quiet Place Part 2 is that core cast. You know, you had Millicent Simmons in the kind of lead role almost throughout the two films, but also Emily Blunt and John Krasinski being attached to both of them. And now for this to be kind of taken in a new direction, there always is that worry almost that it's gonna lose its way or lose what had us really enjoy the first film. Or the first two films, I should say. But for that, A Quiet Place Day 1 was the one that I went into. I thought if it was great, it will be that. Do you know what I mean? It'll go, if they really knock it out of the park, of course, elevating the scale. Of course, the first two films being set more in a kind of rural and outskirts scenario with these creatures hunting them and everything like that. Whereas Day One, really, you're right in the middle of the city. You've got, there's nowhere to hide, if you like. It's obviously going to escalate the scale to this is the whole city being tormented by this. And for A Quiet Place Day One, and particularly in the performances, I would say Joseph Quinn was great. Joseph Quinn, I think this is the one that really is going to start to elevate him into, an actor that you look out for whenever you see the cast list coming out for certain films. Of course, he'll be in the Fantastic Four in 2025, and again, I would imagine that'll boost him even further. And of course, he had the Stranger Things start, which that really put him on the map, if you like. But I thought he was great here, and one of the things about these films, it's not about these big monologues. It's not about dialogue in any way. As if you've seen the films, they're never a focus on dialogue. It's actually a focus on the lack thereof of dialogue. But for this, Joseph Quinn, he does a brilliant way of saying a lot by just expressions, by giving emotions, but not going, not shouting to the world, I am really annoyed, or I am really sad, or, he doesn't tell us. It's a way of showing, not telling. And this kind of echoes throughout the whole film. But what I've said there about Joseph Quinn and how he was great in it, I have to say Lupita Nyong'o is on another level. Lupita Nyong'o is one of the better, is it even fair to say up-and-coming actresses? She's one of the best actresses working today. Because she is truly, truly wonderful in this film, and it's one of the more underrated performances of 2024. And I think it's one of those ones, because of the nature of the film, it would never be even thought about in award season, but it definitely deserves a mention. I said there when we were talking about the Honourable Mentions about Smile 2 for Naomi Scott, and again, this is better, but Naomi Scott is great in that film too. But there is this kind of stigma around horror films where really brilliant performances, the one that annoys me, and it will annoy me forever, I think I talked about it when I mentioned it in a previous 5 of the Best, is in Hereditary. Toni Collette, one of my favourite female performances in a movie ever, didn't even get a sniff of awards at award season. And it was just unbelievable, her performance in that film. And while this isn't as strong as that, it does just show that, and this doesn't apply just to female, actors in this either. This is. There seems to be this stigma around horror as a whole, and also these kind of big blockbuster movies. There seems to be a stigma around. There's never going to be an award, even though there's brilliant performances in them. But the two core performances here, Lupita Nyong'o and Joseph Quinn, and also a special mention to Frodo the Cat, because what a name, first of all. But second of all, the dynamic here, while it's a tension building scenario throughout the whole film, as the two previous films did so brilliantly, I honestly I remember saying it when I did my initial thoughts or my review at the time, which was, I think I enjoyed this one the most, or I was deliberating with myself, did I enjoy this one the most? And honestly, the more I've thought about it, I definitely do. And I know that's maybe a bit controversial. People maybe preferred the previous two, or certainly the first one, rather than this one. But for me, I think it's a series that the first two are on par with me. But I do think the third one is the strongest. Because I think it, as I said at the start, it's that kind of gamble of, okay, we're going to take it in a new direction. Of course, John Krasinski isn't at the helm anymore. It isn't the core cast that made the first two so brilliant. But what they take this to in new heights, I loved it. I thought Quiet Place Day One is a film that it had so much to say, ironically, in a film that there isn't much dialogue. You know what I mean? And the performances here, the emotional moments, and again, emotional moments that aren't, here's a large talking scene with two characters bouncing off each other, getting themselves emotional, or talking about or recounting things. The things we learn about these characters is very little. But the little that we do really hit home. And actually, in a way, A Quiet Place Day One is quite a simplistic story at its core. They just need to escape. But what else it says in there is what surprised me so much. I really enjoyed this film. And it is one that, maybe I enjoyed it a lot more than some people did. I know the critics seem to have liked it but not loved it. But for me, I thought this was it was right up there for the best horror films of 2024. It was one of the best blockbusters of 2024. And for me, it's the 5th best film of 2024.
Number 4.
Gladiator 2 is directed by Ridley Scott and stars Paul Mescal, Denzel Washington, and Pedro Pascal. I'm talking about a franchise that took things in a new direction, to a franchise that really brilliantly recaptured the magic of what it was following in Gladiator 2. A film that was a long, long time in the making. What is it, 24 years? The first film came out in the year 2000. One of the truly great films of that era. Russell Crowe in one of the most brilliant performances of that time. And a film that, if you ask a lot of people what are their top 5 or 10 movies, I would say a lot of them would talk about Gladiator. It is a truly brilliant film, and is a film that I, like so many people, love and have such an appreciation for. So when it comes to Gladiator 2, and Gladiator 2 is a film that was announced and I kind of went, it falls into that category, and you've heard me say this before, about films that do not need sequels. I talked about this for this year, and it appeared on the worst films of 2024 on TikTok, which was Joker Folie à Deux, a film that did not need to be made because a sequel was not needed. The first film is brilliant, and the sequel actually hampered the first films, my enjoyment of the first film. And this was only a month before Gladiator 2 was released. And I thought, I really hope Gladiator 2 doesn't do the same thing. Kind of reduces my enjoyment of the first Gladiator. But what this was, and again, I feel like I repeat myself when I talk about sequels of this nature, but I love a sequel, or prequel, or any kind of continuation of media that celebrates the product it's following. And I think Gladiator 2 is a brilliant example of that. Because so many continuations of stories, even if they're 20 years in the future, or if they're prequels or whatever, they always want to put their own spin on it, what they think the film should be. But in Gladiator 2, you've got Ridley Scott, who of course directed the first one. He knows what the story should be. He knows what the tale should be. And yes, there is a few things in here, and Ridley Scott is kind of renowned for this in the recent times, where he just kind of takes liberties with history, let's say. Something like the stuff with Napoleon, that was obviously a big factor last year, and that film is nowhere near the quality of Gladiator 2, by the way. This is kind of a return to form for Ridley Scott. But yes, in Gladiator 2, there is a bit of CGI. There is water in the Colosseum that people kind of got their back up about that wasn't water. That is true. There was water for like a display once, so it did happen. However, there was not sharks in the water. So, a little bit of liberties taken there. But again, and we do kind of have to do this sometimes, it is just a movie. And what's going to make it more enjoyable? If those waters were fine and people just fell off the boats and there was no danger there, then that whole set piece doesn't work, and that set piece in the film is really enjoyable. So we kind of have to switch our brains off a little bit for that element. But you don't have to switch your brain off for the story being told here. And the core performance by Paul Mescal, taking up the kind of Russell Crowe's, the continuation of that story, if you like, even though his has a closure. This is almost, and quite figuratively, picking up the sword and shield again, and fighting for the same honor that came before it. But that was something that I'd hoped, because Paul Mescal is a good actor, and I think he's one, a bit like what I talked about there with Joseph Quinn. I do think for Paul Mescal, it's films like this that really elevate him into, okay, that's an actor I look out for now. I see him on the cast list for any film upcoming. And this was definitely that. This is the real star-making role for him. I thought he was really brilliant in the role, not because he was that. Again, funny enough, not also for the lead character, at least, a dialogue-heavy film. It was more the surrounding characters doing most of the dialogue, particularly Denzel Washington, who I'll talk about in a minute. But for Paul Mescal, as this kind of stoic, strong figurehead for rebellion. I thought he played the role really well. Is he as good as Russell Crowe? That's not a fair comparison, because that film is more iconic and is a classic and everything. So it's different. But when a sequel comes along to celebrate that, this is one of the better ones in kind of the last year or two that has done that so well. But not only because of the lead role and the lead dynamic and other supporting characters. You've got Connie Nielsen coming back, who was also, I think she was better in Gladiator 2, because I think she has more to do and is more integral to the story. And also the dynamic with Pedro Pascal, who again is an actor that is just going from strength to strength to strength, has been in so many iconic roles already and will no doubt continue to be. He is really brilliant in literally everything I've seen him in. He has been such a core part of it, from The Mandalorian to The Last of Us to this to now he's going to be Mr. Fantastic. What's his actual name again? Reed Richards? Yeah. So he's been in lots of different brilliant roles, and I think that will continue because of how good he is. But the last performance I want to talk about is someone that I mentioned there a second ago, and I don't know how many times on this series alone, or in any time of me talking about movies, and probably most people who talk about movies have waxed lyrical about this actor. But Denzel Washington is amazing in this film. And even those words, that sentence alone, has probably been said so many times by me. Denzel Washington is truly... He's one of those actors that has such an aura about him, and I don't really like using that terminology, but for this it's probably the most appropriate, because Denzel Washington, when he walks into a scene in any movie, whether it be a bank heist, whether it be a Roman Colosseum, whether it be whatever, he is instantly the most charismatic, the most interesting, and the most... It's nearly like every plot that I've seen, every time I've seen Denzel Washington in a film, or almost every time I've seen him in a film, there is so much weight on his shoulders for the story, the plot, and everything to work. And that applies here too. In Gladiator 2, this is not just a switch your brain off gladiator fighting battles in the Colosseum movie. It does have a lot of that, and those action scenes are brilliant, and they're in here. But there's a lot more nuance, there's a lot more narrative tropes in here that you would think wouldn't be in a Gladiator film. Similar to how the first one was. A lot better story. Like, you know, when I think of the first film, the kind of emotional moments at the start, you know, you've got the opening battle in the first film, and then after that you've kind of the really interesting dynamic of Maximus and Russell Crowe chatting to the Emperor, Richard Harris's character, and honestly, that stuff there is almost as good as the big action scenes, and it rides a good parallel between the two. And I thought Gladiator 2 did that as well. Not maybe just as good as the first one does, and that's why I don't think Gladiator 2 is just as good as the first film. But that was never... I don't think there's a world where Gladiator 2 is ever gonna be better than the first film. For both, just because of the nostalgic nature and how iconic it was, and it's a classic for so many people, including me. But Gladiator 2 did everything I wanted the sequel to be. And I remember saying at the time in my initial thoughts video, I don't know that I could have been happier walking out a Gladiator sequel than I was walking out Gladiator 2. And for me, that's why I love this film. It's really great. It has so much of the stuff you would expect, but also a lot more twists and turns and narrative choices that keeps you hooked and not going, okay, this is just copy and paste. Because there's some moments that are brilliant in the way that they harken back to the first film and pay tribute and you know, take inspiration from. But there is also so much more in here that in different directions that it goes and modernizes, and Gladiator 2 is really, really good.
Number 3.
Poor Things is directed by Yorgos Lanthimos and stars Emma Stone, Mark Ruffalo, and Willem Dafoe. Now you might be saying to yourself, hang on a minute, that did not come out in 2024. And it's just something I've talked about before. It's such a frustration when things get released in the States and they don't come to Europe until, a good few months later. Poor Things arrived in like the second week of January in 2024. So it does feel, I know we had a full Oscar season. Emma Stone, of course, won the Oscar, which I'd hoped she would after seeing this. So it feels weird talking about it so far after the fact that it is this year. But it was. It was. Right at the very, very start of 2024, I saw Poor Things. And as time has passed, you would think sometimes you go, okay, well, I was on a real high coming out of that film, but maybe I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I did. No, Poor Things is a really, really, really crazy film. It's full of twists and turns and craziness and madness throughout, and almost, in Yorgos Lanthimos, you've nearly got kind of the mind of a madman, it feels like, or a mad inventor directing films sometimes. But through this madness, through this craziness, and the dynamic and the story, the plot of Poor Things being this kind of Frankenstein-ish film, Frankenstein into the world, but on a female side of things, it's just so much more than that. But let's talk about the thing that I enjoy talking about, which is the performances. And the performances in here are just amazing. Emma Stone, of course, won Oscar down before this film came out with La La Land, another brilliant performance. And for someone who I remember when I first seen probably my favourite comedy, or one of my favourite comedies, in Superbad all those years ago, and she's a supporting character there, and the kind of love interest, let's say, for Jonah Hill, for what she has made of her career, and how much better of an actor I thought than I thought she was. Emma Stone is one of the best working actresses today. She's already got the rewards, 2 Oscars now, and she's another actress that when you hear, I know that's been the common trend of this video, when you hear their name attached, you're instantly intrigued, but that was the case here. You've got Emma Stone, you've got Mark Ruffalo, you've got Willem Dafoe. Willem Dafoe, I think I talked about this not long ago when I was talking about Nosferatu, which is, Willem Dafoe is the supporting actor in Hollywood today. Not a good supporting actor, he is the supporting actor. Because when he's attached to a project, and that's why so many of these directors, and that's why I always think there's like a parallel between Yorgos Lanthimos and Robert Eggers, because both of those directors are like, well, Willem Dafoe's my guy. He's in all my movies because I need him there. He's just adds so much, and he adds so much quality, but also in such a unique way. Willem Dafoe as the kind of, well, as I said, it like a mad inventor in this that almost creates the Frankenstein in this movie. He is wonderful, but the performance that's the real shock here. And I know loads of people said this after the film, so I'm not saying anything new, but I do have to say, it's when I look at the top films here, it might be my favorite comedic performance of the year, but more in a film that you wouldn't think would be that comedic heavy. There are some parts in Poor Things that are honestly laugh out loud hilarious. And by some I mean there's a good lot. It is not a film that takes itself so seriously in this crazy wacky narrative that you don't find the enjoyment. There is also hilarity to be found throughout this, and none more so does that come from than Mark Ruffalo. Now Mark Ruffalo is an actor that I do not think, or didn't really think of too highly. I like him, of course, probably best known for his Hulk role, but even something way back in like the Zodiac, the Robert Downey Jr., Jake Gyllenhaal film, and like, was it like late 2000s film? He is a good actor. Even something like Dark Waters, the one with him and Anne Hathaway. He has been in very serious roles, and he's good in serious roles. But my God, he might be one of the funniest actors working today. And this has sold me on it. Because his performance in Poor Things is... The dynamic between him and Emma Stone's character throughout this is really... Him as this... Is it Duncan Ballantyne? Is that the character's name? And he's... as this kind of uptight, posh character who stands himself in very good stead, but then he meets Emma Stone's character and has this kind of infatuation. It just loses all morals, all dignity, and falls head over heels for her. And that dynamic is, even thinking about it now, is about to make me laugh because it is so funny. But also in Poor Things, it's not just that. There's emotion, there's a kind of coming of age story, there's, it's very adult, there's a lot of sexual content throughout it. It's a film that ticks a lot of boxes. And just as growing up as people, and how you get just dropped into the world. There's a lot of symbolism and a lot of brilliant things, and Poor Things has so much quality, kind of from the start to the end, and it has so many interesting directing choices by Yorgos Lanthimos, and particularly at the start, it's almost, I think for the first kind of maybe 30-40 minutes, maybe not as long as that, but it's in pure black and white to tell the story, and it's these kind of circle shots rather than rectangular shots they're shot in, and it's kind of like it's almost like in a flashback nearly, it feels. But then as time goes, it opens up into one of the most colourful and full of colour films I've ever seen, and the way that's done is brilliant. The score is so unique, and that's not just for this film. Yorgos Lanthimos, his other film this year, which I enjoyed, I mentioned there in the Honourable Mentions, Kinds of Kindness. His score is almost the most interesting part of the film, because it's never going to be sweeping orchestral pieces. It's never going to be, like music from, the charts or anything like that. It's always the most unique. For Kinds of Kindness, for example, it's like one piano key throughout the whole film, just hit in different ways or in different tones or things like that. And the Poor Things score is even more unique. But overall, I could talk about all this forever. Poor Things is a film that has so much depth to it. It's a film that I've seen twice now, and I can't wait to revisit again, because I think there's a lot more. It's another film that rewards the rewatches. And with all that being said, Poor Things was a shoo-in to be a contender for a Film of the Year, and I was so happy when it got rewarded at the Academy Awards, because it deserved it. It really did. It really deserved it. Poor Things is so brilliant. I'm sure you've heard a lot of people talking about how good this film is and how unique this film is and how unique of an experience it is watching it, with all the things it has in it. The hilarity, the adult moments, the emotional moments, the action moments even, the solemn moments, the good character work, the dialogue, and Emma Stone in this kind of baby role at the start and as it kind of goes. There's just so much to love in here. So much to love. It's one of the more unique experiences I've had in the last few years watching a movie. And for me, when the unique experiences are brilliant like this, that's a real winner for me. And Poor Things is the one that, for me, when I see the name Yorgos Lanthimos, I'm on board. Sign me up. I'm definitely seeing that film when it comes out. Whatever his next film will be, I will be there.
Number 2.
The Substance is directed by Coralie Fargeau and stars Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley. So just missing out on the top spot is The Substance, a film that is widely tipped to be awarded a lot when it comes to award season in the next few months, and is a film that I can't believe how much of a surprise it was, and I think that's why everybody loves it. But I'm also amazed at how, because of the nature of this film, because this film is gross, this film is crazy, this film does not hold back one bit in showing you anything and everything, even as brutal or as disgusting as it can be. The Substance, even with all that being said, is full of so much quality. And you know what it is? More than anything else. Because you get these sometimes, and they usually don't end up being brilliant films. But you have a film that is a really good premise. The Substance itself is a brilliant premise. An aging actor or actress gets this copy of themselves, this opportunity to have a copy of themselves, younger version, and live a week apart. And you have to abide by the rules and stay by the rules. That in itself is a truly brilliant premise. but most films that get unique or brilliant premises, they don't fulfill it to its most potential or fullest potential. The Substance, more than any film I can think of in the last 2 or 3 years, takes the premise and pushes it to its absolute best. Because I remember chatting to some people about this, and some people went, that movie was crazy, it was so mad, particularly the closing act and the kind of last hour of the film, or the last 40 minutes. It actually was this film that made me realise how much I love when a film gets a great... Because I remember thinking halfway through The Substance, I remember thinking, this is such... And you can't look away. It's one of those films where, even as brutal and as disgusting and everything as it is, you can't not be enthralled by the story being told, or what twists and turns it's going to take next. And honestly, that... I couldn't get over how much I loved that The Substance took this brilliant premise and went, okay, we can go really crazy with this. Let's do that, but times 10. Because The Substance final act is honestly a work of art. A work of beautiful, disgusting, revolting art that the last 30 minutes of that cinematic experience is something I will never forget. Because I was in cinema, like a smaller screen, seeing it, and there was probably about 30 people in, I would say. And it was funny to see the range of age groups and contexts that were there. You know, there was young couples, there was older gentlemen there on his own, there was different dynamics, and nobody went, this is disgusting, I'm walking out, I can't even look at that. Everybody was locked in, as crazy, and the shocked faces and the gasps and everything was just... Even now, I just think of how amazing that cinematic experience and that theatre experience was being there. And I can't think of too many films that fall into that ilk in the last while. The Substance is a film that, again, another one where we talk about films that you go in blind and know very little about. All I knew was Demi Moore was attached, and that was it. And back then, Margaret Qualley wasn't a name that I knew too well. This is definitely her star-making year, 2024. The Substance, Kinds of Kindness, you know, both of those. And, well, those in particular. I know she was in other roles too, but those two in particular. And I think the dynamic itself between those two, the two performances by both actresses, should be awarded when it comes to Oscar season. I know they're front runners anyway. I know Demi Moore already won the Golden Globes as the time recording this, and I do think there's a real good chance that she then goes on to win the Oscar. I do think it's a strong case that she does, but there is also, it's a strong category. The Best Actress, it's a stacked one this year. So I'm on board if she wins, but there's also strong ones that I'd be happy if they won too. But in supporting actress, I really hope it's Margaret Qualley, to be honest with you. I thought she was as good as Demi Moore in this. But the dynamic itself, the topic of aging, the topic of pressures of fame and pressures of wanting to be beautiful, and so many things that I think everybody in different levels have felt, or can, in some ways you can't relate to at all, certainly on the fame side of things, but also you can understand, you get characters' feelings. And again, it's a brilliant version, or it's a brilliant example, of a film that is show, don't tell. And it shows you everything. It doesn't hold back in showing you any kind of brutal or any detail. You're seeing it. But you also know how the characters are feeling. You know the scenario, you know the pressures they're under. They don't have to tell you. There isn't a whole... There isn't a bit after... The movie starts with Demi Moore kind of finishing up her role, and they want to hire a younger model, let's say. And there isn't this whole exposition scene after this to go, I'm really annoyed, I wish they had have kept me on, or I'm feeling old. It doesn't ever say that. It doesn't insult your intelligence either. It's a film that is a lot more... It's filled with a lot more detail and a lot more quality, just on the if you get locked in and you really soak in this film, the substance has exactly that. It has so much substance. It's a movie, and for Coralie Fraujo as a director, that's someone that I didn't know too much about. I'd seen Revenge, her previous film, which is a film that is decent. I didn't love. I got the message. I thought it was very powerful, especially on the women's side. And she seems to be a very women-focused director, and she's probably one of the best working today on that after these two films, particularly. But what she does, she seems to be a very unique director in the sense of, okay, here's the story, here's the scenario. I am not going to shy away from any single bit of what we're telling here. There is no cutaway shots. There is no shots framed in a way where you don't actually see what's going on. You have to tell everything you see, and there's not a sense of wonder. But and you would go, okay, well, it's hand holding then. It's not. It does it in a way. There's nudity and film and throughout this film, but it's not done in a way that's sexualized. It's done in a way that is almost adding to the authentic nature of this scenario, rather than it being, as I say, sexualized or whatever else. It's not an erotic film by any means. It is. and the body horror stuff, the kind of Cronenbergian kind of, I mean, it just does. I can't stop thinking. It's one of those films, and I seen it, was it like middle of the year, something like that, and ever since I seen it, when I think about movies of 2024, I just keep thinking back to just the experience as a whole, and my disgust at some parts of it. I remember I told my dad to go and see it, and he's one that I he's not someone that I would think would have appreciated a movie like this. And I went to him, I said, well, it's absolutely crazy. There's a lot of brutal stuff and disgusting stuff and everything, but it's one of the more unique experiences of seeing a film. And he went, okay, I'll go and see it. And he loved it. He thought it was, he was really surprised. And yes, he said it was grotesque and everything like that. But it seems to be one that, and I kind of harken back to what I was saying there about all the kind of different categories of film gore that were there when I seen it that night, and this probably applies to everybody that's seen it. But there was all different, age groups and probably different tolerances too. But there wasn't anybody that walked out and went, oh, that is revolting, I'm not watching that tripe, that's disgusting. No, there was never that. The substance is, you're hearing a lot of talk about it for award season, rightly so. I'm so glad a film like it, and weirdly, harking back to what I was talking about when I was talking about The Quiet Place there, a little bit back when, talking about horror films, and I don't know, I know it's been described, body horror, I think is the kind of subcategory this falls into. It's not a film that is scary in the sense of there's no jump scares, there's no, dark corridors or anything like that. It's not that kind of, I wouldn't really call it horror film, but I suppose body horror is probably the most apt subgenre for it. But it's also amazing to see, and kind of what I was talking about there about how actors and actresses don't really get appreciated for work in films like this. It just shows how much this did everything right for it to be awarded, because a film that is this disgusting for the whites, kind of the Academy to be like, well, they're definitely contenders because everybody in this is brilliant and the film is, and I wonder, will Coralie Fraujo be up for Best Director? I think she should be. I think for how uniquely, how unique and how powerful this film is, and how much it almost hits you up the face with everything it throws at you. The substance is amazing. You've heard that probably from anybody who's seen it. It's an experience rather than a film almost, and it is no doubt one of the best films of 2024, one of the most memorable films of 2024, and one of the most memorable films of the 2020 so far. And did it push the top spot? It didn't, because of how good number one is, but once I seen it, I remember thinking to myself, we'll have to find something else really, really brilliant just to knock it off that. And for it to be above Poor Things as well, two really brilliant films there. But the substance is special. Special in all the right ways and also all the disgusting ways. The substance is amazing. However, it's not my favourite film of the year 2024 because my favourite film is
Number 1.
Dune Part 2. It's directed by Denis Villeneuve and stars Timothée Chalamet, Zendaya, Austin Butler, and a lot of other people. So here we are, the film you knew that was going to be here. The film that is probably the top of a lot of people's list of 2024. Dune Part 2 is... Okay, well, we'll start by talking a little bit of context. The first film, Dune, came out 2021. It was the best film for me that year of a COVID year. So, yes, there was not so many films out that year, but I still thought the first part of Dune was amazing. And it was a film that, as I say, was my favourite of the year, and instantly it went, okay, that was really good. And I always thought the first part of Dune was kind of the calm before the storm. And more of an optimism, because I'm not someone that knows the source material. I haven't read the books. I didn't see the Calvin MacLachlan film all those years ago either. So it's more of a, okay, I'm excited for part 2, but let's see what happens. I hope they can take what they did in the first film and hopefully elevate it. But like what we talked about with Gladiator, doing a sequel that either builds on what we have or takes it to the next level. And for Dune Part 2, I talked about, when I did my initial thoughts about Dune Part 2, I talked in length and waxed lyrical about this film. More than I've waxed lyrical about any other film that I've talked about so far when reviewing them, particularly on the first watch. And I did think at the time it's the best film I've seen since I started. So I started reviewing movies early 2021. So I remember thinking then, after I've seen this film, I thought that's the best film I've seen since I've started reviewing films. Because yes, we've had a few other 10 out of 10s. We've had The Batman, an amazing film, Everything Everywhere All at Once, The Same, and Across the Spider-Verse, and Oppenheimer, amazing films. The ones that are 10 out of 10s are are already in my list of favourite films I've seen. If I was doing a top 50 or top 40, I think they would all 4 of those I've mentioned would be included. But for Dune Part 2, I think, it's hard not to be too dramatic when talking about this film, but I don't want to undersell it either. I think Dune Part 2 is a modern day masterpiece. And I think it has so much depth, so much lore, so much story being told, so much brilliant character work by everyone. And I'm going to say something that I rarely give out this, or I rarely kind of give out this kind of accolade. It reminds me of the brilliant character work for every character that the Lord of the Rings trilogy did so well. And the Lord of the Rings trilogy, if you know me and you've been on the channel for a while, for me, the Lord of the Rings trilogy is above any other film. The Fellowship of the Ring is my favourite film ever made and probably always will be. I absolutely adore those 3 films, and they're above, as I say, everything, because The Two Towers and Return of the King are also masterpieces. They're all masterpieces. They're just amazing films. Dune Part 2 is the closest thing I can think of to be this generation's Lord of the Rings. Dune as a whole. The first film isn't as good as Fellowship of the Ring, because of course it's not in my opinion anyway. The second film, do you know what? The better comparison, because the Lord of the Rings, it's not really fair for me to compare that. The better comparison is the Star Wars trilogy. The original Star Wars trilogy, not the prequels, not the sequels. This is the Empire Strikes Back for this generation, and yes, I've heard that said many a time, and I know that's not me saying that for the first time. But I think it's so true. Because the quality and the almost iconic nature of it, and how much of it's a world and it's a lore that you can lock yourself into. But to be honest with you, I'm not one that's taking this and then going, okay, I want to read about everything. Like I'm not going to read the books probably until Dune Messiah comes out, because I want to be going into that film not knowing what to expect. And for Dune Part 2, I don't know that I've seen a sequel build on a first film as strongly as this, certainly in a long time. Take what is already a really brilliant premise and a really brilliant base in the first film. And the first film has Oscar Isaac, one of my favourite actors, and him being not in the second one, let's say. I'm thinking, oh, well, that's my favourite actor being out of it. Dune Part 2 is... It's a masterpiece. It is straight in there with one of my favourite films. I've rewatched it since it came out about 6 times now, and each time I'm almost blown away. The scenes with the sandworms at the start, the large battles at the end, the kind of the really emotional character moments throughout, the character work throughout. Remember, Zendaya. Well, here's where I start going through all performance, and I don't want to just rehash what I said in the initial thoughts, but I just want to kind of reconfirm my feelings on Dune Part 2 and how much I loved it. And let's go by performances. I was going to start with Zendaya, but we'll start with the main man, Timothée Chalamet. Timothée Chalamet is an actor that is going strength throughout his career, and him as Paul Atreides is instantly one of my favourite performances of the 2010s. It might be one of my favourite performances ever. Him as this kind of messianic role that he's been almost forced into or wants to adopt, and the dynamic and the kind of the false religion side of things is a real interesting part to this. But also his love story and the character work between him and Zendaya. And Zendaya as Jani in the first film is just there in flashbacks and has like a few lines at the end as the first film comes to a close. So she's not a character we're going into this with too much knowledge about. Zendaya, this is the film for me, and I said, I know for a fact I'm just copying what I said in my initial thoughts, but I remember I wasn't totally sold on the Zendaya hype train. I remember thinking, Zendaya is a good actress. I think she's decent, but I do think she's being positioned for all these movies, and I'm going, she's in everything. Why is she even that good? And I remember thinking to myself, and then I seen Euphoria, and then I went, you know what, actually she is brilliant. But I hadn't seen her be this fantastic on the main stage until this, and she had a great year, 2024 again, and again there's been some common through lines of this 5 of the best, but something that has been the case for a lot of actors and actresses for this year was they've had real breakout years. I talked about Margot Qualley there just a minute ago about how she had to. Zendaya in Dune Part 2, which I'll talk about in a second, but also to be in Challengers, a film that I really enjoyed, but she is by far and away the strongest part of it. Zendaya is a star, and this thing that she's just a model or she's just a Disney Channel actor turned whatever, I just don't think so. I just think she is one of the brightest actresses working today, and the emotion she shows throughout Dune Part 2 and the dynamic between her and Paul Atreides in this. I mean, Chani's character is almost as interesting as Paul Atreides throughout this film, and you know, that's not to say that it's just them. There's so many. Rebecca Ferguson, another actress that I loved in something like Doctor Sleep. I thought her as Rose the Hat in Doctor Sleep was the best thing of that film. She's one of the best things of this film, and while she's decent, well, actually, you know, I would say she's good to great in the first film. As she joins the Bene Gesserit in this and becomes almost like a stoic mother in this scenario. She's going from strength to strength too. Austin Butler as this kind of just pure evil, if you like, just a pure outright villain. A bit like how, you know, Stellan Skarsgård was in the first one as the Harkonnens. It is there's so much here to absorb, and it's so much brilliance.
so many brilliant directing choices. I talked there when I talked about Corey Varjo about best director. For me, Denis Villeneuve has to win this. This is his man. Denis Villeneuve is a director, and I always feel like I'm saying his name wrong. I hope I'm saying it right. But he is a director that has so many brilliant, and not good, brilliant films. Like multiple 10 out of 10 films. And I do think Dune Part 2 is his masterpiece. I really hope that Dune Messiah can at least stick the landing of what this is set up, because what I remember some of the actors talking about this in interviews, and I remember thinking to myself, Jesus, that's high praise. Whenever it was like Timothée Chalamet, Zendaya, and a few others, can't remember who else it was, but they all kind of said, I'm so glad that I've been able to be in a film as good as Dune Part 2. And I remember going, that's either very good promotion or you're being serious. And they're being serious. This is... I think it is the best feeling I've had coming out of a cinema since doing this channel, since talking about movies and 2021 from then. It is the best film I've seen on the big screen. It is one of my favourite cinema experiences ever. And simply, Dune Part 2 is one of my favourite films ever. It is an instant top 10 for me, at least. And for me, it's I think I'd probably put it in like my top 5 at the minute. I just can't. It's a film that it really felt so rewarding. Just soaking it all in and enjoying it and taking in everything it has. And on rewatches, there's so much more depth. There's so much brilliant character work, the action scenes, the cinematography. Some of the shots in this film are honestly unbelievable. The final are kind of near the end. Some of the shots there are just mind-blowing. Some of the images you're looking at now on screen, for example, some of those shots are some of my favourite in recent memory. Dune Part 2 is a masterpiece for me. It's a masterpiece. It's the best film I've seen since I started reviewing movies, and it's already one of my favourite films I've ever seen. And definitely one of my favourite cinematic experiences going to see it. I loved it. I love it so much. I don't know that my opinion on this will change as time goes on. I know a lot of people have talked about how much they love this film, and I'm right there with them. It isn't hyperbole to say this is one of the best films made in the last 5 to 10 years or even longer. I don't think. I think Dune Part 2 is not only my favourite film of the year 2024, it is my favourite film since I started reviewing movies. So, take of that, my favourite film since 2021 to now. It is an amazing, amazing film. If you haven't seen it, put the work in, watch the first one first, and what it sets up. The first film sets a brilliant base. The second film is just magic. It is absolutely magic. It is an amazing, it's a special, special movie. Special to me, and I just can't wait to I can't wait to see another film. I don't know when it'll be. It could be this year. It could be 5 years from now. It could be 15 years from now. I can't wait for another film to give me the feeling I did when I first seen Dune Part 2. And then when I seen it again, and I seen it again, and I seen it again, and I seen it again. Dune Part 2 is amazing. You know it's amazing. You've heard everybody wax lyrical about it for basically what feels like a full year now. And they're right. It's a masterpiece. I loved it. It's my favourite film of the year 2024. So that has been the year 2024. Obviously the format changed slightly, so you got to hear my thoughts on the honourable mentions. I usually would have done them now in the summary, or which ones were closest, but you now know my thoughts of the honourable mentions. So this is more just like a close of the video, and just kind of summary of how my thoughts were of this year. 2024 was a great year. A great year. It's what probably... I know score-wise, you're probably thinking, 2023 there was a few more 9.5s than 9s, and yes, there was 4 9s here and a 10. But the 10 is a 10 more than it is the 10 out of 10 for me, Dune Part 2. But for for the quality, and I think it was a year more of, and I've said this before in years of 5 of the best, where it's not just about which has the ones with the highest scores, which has all 10 out of 10s, or which has the 9.5s and blah blah blah. For me, it's more about the quality of the year, and if you look at how many honourable mentions there was there, for example, that's a really good indicator of how many films I loved this year. It's probably one of the longest lists of honourable mentions. Yes, I did see a good lot. And as the year go on, I start to see more and more films because of doing this and things. But for the honourable mentions, I thought there were so many brilliant, and it was only when I started to write them down and go, oh yeah, that one has to be in, that one has to be in, and I went through the whole list and went, my god, that's a long list of just amazing films I've seen this year. And then you've got the top 5 that are 4 truly brilliant films and a masterpiece. And that's why for me 2024 is a year that I will think of so fondly. That's something, and if you've been on the channel for a while and you've been following the 5 of the best, and I appreciate you if you have, because it started whenever I wasn't really, it was only really getting started. It's been a long running series now. But if you notice on 5 of the best, I very rarely say, if ever, that it was a bad film year. Bar like 2020 for obvious reasons, because there wasn't many films that were released. That was more of a circumstantial thing rather than a reason. But the reason I never would say it's a bad film year, because I always think there's quality to be had, or there's films I haven't yet seen. There's an example not that long ago where I seen Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, a film that is truly amazing. I had never seen it. This is the thing. Some of these guys that do movies online, they don't admit things like this, that they haven't seen every movie that's ever been released, because there's a lot I haven't seen, and I can't wait to see the ones that I haven't seen. But whenever I seen Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, I remember thinking to myself, if I was doing 5 of the best after seeing this, that's a shoe-in to be like number 2 that year, where it didn't even get included because I hadn't seen it. So my kind of point is that even the film years that you might go, say for this year for example, when I think about the mainstream audiences, myself, and maybe if you're watching this you might be a bit more like me, where you see a lot of movies and you're go more than maybe the average film goer. But when you think about the films that people would have went to the cinema to see this year, the kind of big ones, say Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, Furiosa, Quiet Place, you probably put in that category, Deadpool and Wolverine, Alien Romulus, Dune, maybe, or even at the younger age, Sonic, or there's a lot of, or Wicked, there's a lot of films that people would have went. I just think, yes, there's been some real stinkers this year. There's some stinkers every year. There's a lot of really bad films every year, and there's a lot of truly brilliant films like we've celebrated today. But my point is that there's always going to be brilliant and there's always going to be bad. It's just how good or how bad it gets. Do you know what I mean? And I do think that we're in such being a movie fan has been so rewarding, and to be honest, I think I've talked about this a little bit before, but through COVID and that time I went, okay, I want to do something with my time, my extra time that I have, and I wanted to talk about movies, and that became this. But when I started talking about movies, my first initial thoughts was a Zack Snyder's Justice League, which I watched on streaming. The cinema wasn't open. I started this before I even knew that the cinemas are, I knew they would have, but there was always that worry, well, we just transitioned to streaming now. But when they reopened, it reminded me and it reaffirmed me how much I love film. And I think even if I wasn't doing these reviews, I would still be going as much as I do now. It's so rewarding nowadays to be a film fan, and a film fan of, if you narrow yourself, and again, you do what you like, but I do feel that if you try to widen your horizons, if you just go, I really only see horrors, or I only really see comedies, or I only really see rom-coms, I do think there's such rewarding in each genre, and that's why, and even something like, there's films that you would turn your nose up, and I remember, I talked about this when I talked about Wicked. Wicked is a film, or Barbie last year, which I didn't really like that much, but I can understand and I appreciate the quality of it, and I know why people did like it. For Wicked this year is probably a better example, which is, I do think that I would have went, oh well, that's not for me. That's not, it's a musical. It's kind of, no, it's just not something I would go and see. And then you go, and then you get to enjoy yourself. If you go and you don't enjoy it, okay, well, we'll just write that off, and you go, oh, it was okay, and then we'll move on. But if you go and see something brilliant, that's a real win. And there is so many brilliant films coming out nowadays. Think of how many all those honourable mentions that didn't even get into the top 5 of this year. And this year, you could argue there's been stronger years. I still think the strongest years are like the 2019 and 2017, I think it is. They're the two I think of when I think of like the real best quality years throughout. But 2024, and if 2024 is anything to go by, and 2025, and again, this is me saying something I say after a lot of these videos, but it's true. If 2025 is able to capture what 2024 had and what 2023 had, we're on to a winner again. And I just can't wait to see what will be the great films this year. And I guess there'll be the stinkers, but I love movies, guys. That's the long and short of it. And I'm sure you do too. I just think there's so much great quality productions, and so many productions nowadays that have so much heart and soul poured into them, and that translates really well to the audience. And that's why I can't wait to see what's next. I've already, by the time of making this, we're about halfway through January, and I've already seen a few really great films in January alone. So what will come the rest of 2025, who knows? I'm sure there'll be a lot of real rotten films, but it's the great ones that we're there for, and I just can't wait. Being a movie fan's really rewarding nowadays. And yeah, and also, before I go, I just want to say, we're up to date. We're finally up to date after basically saying that for so many 5 of the best videos, and it being kind of delayed a little bit last year. It was supposed to be monthly, and it got pushed. But I was like 4 last year, so I apologise for the people who really enjoy this 5 of the best stuff. But for me, I'm so glad that I can now have a bit of a roundup each year in this format. Because I'm sure there's far bigger YouTubers and movie reviewers than me that have their own top 5s and top 10s and top 15s and top 20, whatever. And, they do their own thing. But for me, 5 of the best is going to be mine going forward. So about this time next year, you'll see 5 of the best for 2025. And I just hope and I pray that it'll be another great movie year. But yeah, lastly, and you know what? That's it. I'm going to let you go because you've been here long enough, and I appreciate you so much for watching this video. As always, leave a like, let me know you enjoyed it. If you subscribe, I'd love you for it. The channel is growing so much. The TikTok, the Letterboxd. I'm very active on there as well. That's where all the reviews go, and then their links and everything. So if you want to follow me on any of that, you know where I am on all the socials. And yeah, thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to me talking about the movies. And if you stick around, I will hopefully see you in the next one. Bye, guys.
Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Before you go, here are some of my other videos. For updates and information on upcoming videos, the best place to find us is my Twitter. Much love, everyone.